All right. Welcome everyone to another exciting webinar on the Grove. We have asked Nick Sinclair to come back based on the success of his last webinar, and we're just very excited to have Nick today to take us through really what every firm leader needs to know about outsourcing. So, Nick, for those of you those out there that may not know you, do you want to just give a quick introduction, and then I'm actually going to fade into the background and take over the chat and the Q&A.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Alison. I am going to give an actual background on my story, but Nick Sinclair, founder of Tower Global. I owned an accounting firm for over 5 years. I was a financial planner for over 12 years. So absolutely love this industry, and I'll go through my story in a little bit. But to kick off today's event, I always love to start with a quote, particularly one that's relevant for this topic. Good things never come from comfort zones. If we want success, we must get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Now, building a global team, outsourcing, those types of topics that we're going to cover today are typically uncomfortable for this industry, particularly in the US. We've been going now for 10 years in Australia. Outsourcing and offshoring is quite normal. It's more who's not doing it than who is doing it. But we know in North America that is, I suppose, not there on the journey yet. It is progressing, and it certainly is. I know that I've been attending the BDO Alliance conference for the last 3 days, and the content all day, every day was around staffing capacity. It was around what are the different options that you do have. So today I'm going to be talking about things that may take you outside of your comfort zone. And that's where I'm prompting you to say, look, you need to, if you want success, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And change is sometimes uncomfortable. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my story to give some context around how I went on my journey with building a global team, and how I ended up being ultimately where I am today, which is actually running a global offshoring business across 5 countries. So a bit of backstory on me. So ran an accounting and financial planning business. So I was traditionally in the financial planning business. I was in that for over 12 years. We were fast growing and had all of the pain points that I see other financial planning and accounting firms having these days. I was working enormous hours. I was getting a lot of emails every day. I was spending most of my time in front of clients and in front of my computer, 12, 14, 16-hour days. It was just a lot going on, and we were growing. And the biggest challenge we had is that we couldn't find team members to keep up with our growth. We were growing at over 25% a year on year for close to 10 years in the financial services business, and just struggled with capacity is probably the big way to say it. So I went on this journey where I was part of a board for a group called Entrepreneurs Organization. So it was actually started by an American, Vern Harnish. If you've not read his book, Scaling Up, I highly recommend it. But I went to the Philippines for our global board retreat or training, where there was 1,000 other board members being trained there. And while I was there, one of our members actually lived there, had moved there from Australia to the Philippines, and he was running his offshore team. And I went and had a look at his operation, and it absolutely blew my mind. I mean, the team in the Philippines were outperforming his team in Australia. He was a removalist company. He was generating something like 4,000 leads a day for his business. He was doing all the accounts, all the administration. And it just opened my eyes up. And I went back to Australia, and I said to my general manager that was running the business for me, I said, Diane, we're going to basically put a team in the Philippines. And she looked at me and said, Nick, if you do that, I'm resigning. And so I'll make sure all the leaders come with me. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, we're an Australian business. We're not taking jobs overseas. And I really struggled with that. I said, I'm not asking you, Di, I'm telling you, this is the journey we're going down. She said, well, Nick, I'm not going to be part of that journey. I don't want to be part of that. So I ended up setting up the team and running it myself. I'm very good strategically. I love events like this. When it comes to implementing operational things, it's probably not my greatest strength. So Diane knew that by me doing that, I'd probably get bored with it and forget about it. But I got it up and running, and it was working really well, to the point where I got her committed to coming to the Philippines to have a look at, just to come over and see the country, to see what was happening within the outsourcing space. And so she came over there with me. I'd organized basically a 3-day tour. We're going to go and see 8 different providers a day. after the first provider, we got back into the van that was taking us to all the different locations. And she turned to me and said, Nick, we're flipping the business. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, any role that's not client facing is getting built out in the Philippines. And at the time we had about 45 team members in Australia, and we ended up putting on a team of 30 team members in the Philippines. So then that was basically up and running for our own back office. It took about 6 months to get that done. The first, I call it my first young and dumb, others call it entrepreneurial, was that I decided to basically incorporate over there. I went to the provider where my current team was that I had got up and running, and we had an excessive turnover in the first 3 months. And I went in there and I said to them, you know, you told me all these team members are left, but now that I'm here, I can see them working for other clients. What's happened? And they said to me, Nick, we love so much how much you're training the team members. They become so great that we can now sell them for more to other clients. So basically we're moving them from you to another client. And I said, so I'm basically your training provider. And they said, oh, no, don't look at it that way. And I was like, well, no, that's the reality of it. So I decided my first young and dumb move to, can't be that hard to set up in another country and run a back office for myself. So I ended up doing that. It was an interesting process, got it up and running. And then the president of the EEO board that I was actually over there with is a guy called Rob Nixon. So for those that know Rob Nixon, I'm going to try and get it interactive. Just jump into the chat and put a number 1 if you do know Rob Nixon. He's been coaching accountants for over 20 years. He's very well known more in Australia, New Zealand, UK, and he does coach a fair amount of US firms as well now. But Rob was basically doing a tour called Capitalizing on the Cloud. So it was when Xero just came out, and he was doing a tour for 1,300 accountants over 3 weeks. And he said, Nick, I want to put you on stage at the local Brisbane event to talk about what you're doing and why people need to shift to advisory. So he was ultimately selling coaching. So shifting to advisory was part of his strategy, you could say. So I ended up saying, look, I want to learn more about how to run my accounting firm better because it's small and we're a financial planning firm, and I want to make it world class. Can I come on all of them with you and I'll pay my own way? And he agreed. So after the first event that I spoke about what I was doing with my global team, I had 5 firms coming up to me and saying, look, Nick, love what you do, but we don't want to have to go through and set up in the Philippines. We don't want to have to learn the local legislation. We don't have to run that side of it. We just want to put our people there and have them work for us. So I had 20 spare desks. I took a 50-seat office. I had 30 seats. I looked at it and went, well, if I can sell those 20 seats that I have, it'll cover the office rent. It'll cover the HR staff that I now have to have, the recruiters, the facilities team, and all the infrastructure that I needed in the Philippines, that if I had that same team in Australia, I wouldn't have needed. But what happened after the end of the 3 weeks is I'd sold 90 roles. And then the year after we're up to 200 roles, and then we're up to 400 roles. And then I probably should have realized sooner, but I was trying to run 2 businesses. I already had no time and was working excessive hours in my accounting, financial planning business. And now having this, what I originally called a hobby, it just became too much. And I decided which way could I, do I move on from the outsourcing and sell that to a provider and just have my team there, or do I move out of the accounting? And the big reason why I went with the outsourcing is when I was 18, my parents lost everything. Part of it was bad advice. Part of it was my father making bad decisions. And I didn't want any small business owner globally to ever have to go through that. And I realized that giving advice to the 300 to 500 firms that we had as clients, it would have an impact, but I could have a greater impact if I could actually give 1 to 2,000 accounting firms a capacity to be able to spend more time with their clients. And that was the way that I went. At that time, we were 400 people. Today, we're over 3,500 people. We're putting on roughly 200 people every month, and we're getting over 3,000 applications a month. So Toa Global was never meant to be what it was. I love advising clients. I love helping them to grow better businesses, to become financially secure, and to be able to ultimately make a bigger impact through their businesses. Because I truly do believe that small businesses drive our economies and communities. So that's a little bit about my story. I was a financial planner. I got sick of waiting, if you want to call it that, from the accounting firms, and they were doing it different in those days of how I wanted it done. You could say I'm a control freak and I wanted it a structured way. So I bought and set up the accounting firm. We were 100% cloud-based from day one. That was very much when Xero was new. We decided to, if a business didn't want to go on that journey with us, then they weren't the type of client we wanted to deal with. So that was a little bit about my journey. And, you know, I love the industry. We solely work with accounting firms and then the services and roles that they have. And I love being part of this industry. I think that we make such a difference. And particularly during the pandemic, I think that we obviously saw the medical profession play a significant part, but I think the part that was underreported was the importance of the accounting and bookkeeping industry and the impact that you all made on the businesses and the people that you work with. And ultimately you kept the economies running by helping your clients be able to get through those times. So I think accounts are so important. Accountants and bookkeepers have got such a critical role to play in the ecosystem. So to make sure that I make today's event relevant to you, I want to go through today's first poll. So Alison, I'll get you to pop this poll up if you can, to give me some context around, do you have a global team? So do you outsource or offshore in any way? So yes, we do. No, we don't. We've tried and it didn't work, or we haven't implemented this strategy yet. So if you can pop into that, Alison, I'll let you run that little.
Yeah. We've got the poll. We've got 80% so far. We are leading with no, we don't. 53% so far, and 32% are saying yes, we do. No one has said we have tried it and it didn't work.
Okay, interesting.
It just maybe just a couple more seconds. We've got some of you. We need about another 10% of you to go ahead and fill in if you could. But you know, Nick, I always appreciate your story. It's so interesting. You kind of almost, it feels like you sort of almost accidentally became successful with how many people you have and but it shows the need, doesn't it? And it shows that you were doing, and when you were telling that story about, you know, that the first outsourced company decided to take your staff and put them on others, I was shocked. I was just like, what?
It's why we have a policy that you can't change clients. And I think that it's, you know, success meets, you know, you got to be in the right place at the right time. You got to be there for the opportunity, but you've also got to take risks. And I think that's the second part of it.
Yeah. So here's the results. We've got 51% that said, no, we don't. 34 that said, yes, we do. And 14% said we haven't implemented this strategy. So interestingly, no one has said we tried it and didn't work. So that's great.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure we cover it so that everyone on today's event gets value out of it and covers it off. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why do we have a talent shortage? And I think that, you know, this is spoken about a lot in the industry now. I know, again, at the conference that I was at this week, that for the last 3 days, the content has all been heavily around this. We all know there's fewer people studying accounting. And I was talking to one of our clients last week, you know, there's normally one university, they recruit from 150 students going through the program. Now there's 75. I saw that during the content for the last few days, they were talking about, you know, there's a demand for 150,000 accountants every year coming in, but there's only 75,000 actually getting out of university and coming into the industry. So I think fewer people are studying accounting. It's not seen as sexy. It's not promoted well. I don't think as an industry, the industry body and ourselves promote it. We talk about, obviously, if you look anywhere online, it talks about the exorbitant hours, the low pay, all these things. But I think that we don't talk about the great impact and the great benefits of, you know, it's a recession-proof industry. I think there's plenty going for it. Even though technology will continue to evolve, we are a human-based business. We will always be needed. So why do we see this talent shortage, and why has it got so bad in the last couple of years? Fewer people are studying. It's been a trend for the last 20 years. It hasn't just been the last couple of years, but it was amplified during the pandemic. Obviously, we had reduced immigration during the pandemic. There was no immigration. So I know in countries like Australia, the UK, Canada, and even USA, the industry is typically propped up by immigration, but we don't take notice because we don't typically see the stats of it. So I think that's an interesting one that really had got forgotten about. And then we see accountants leaving public practice for accounting or for commercial accounting. And I think that's a big one for me, is that I always joke, and our commercial team's not listening, so I can always say it, is that commercial is different. It's in some ways a lot easier. There's less pressure. It's still a hard job, but we are seeing people that are wanting to get out of this tax crunch 3-month period and go back into the commercial space. So this talent shortage is not going to get better in the next 3 to 5 years. That's the reality, and all of these stats and the reasons why.
And Nick, I just wanted to add one more. That's why I kind of popped up like a little gopher here. I want to say something. The other one was that an interesting stat was that the 75% of the AICPA, this was the year 2020, 75% had already reached retirement age. So we're seeing also an aging out, and people are retiring, and they're not staying as long as maybe they might stay. So that's the other thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the problem after the problem is the number of businesses or partners exiting in the next 5 to 10 years is there won't be enough people to take them over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the next problem. That's the next wave, if you want to call it that. But I think this shortage is the challenge and people are really feeling it at the moment. I mean, every good accountant has a job. Anyone that wants a job has a job.
Yeah. And it also, for firm owners, there's a succession issue, right? Like selling the practice. Like you a lot of times people will buy a practice because of the staff. Well, if your staff are all planning to retire, or you haven't retained, and that's where I think your solution can really play a great, because you've got a sustainability built in.
Yeah,
sorry if I'm stealing your thunder for later on.
No,
joining the
thank
dots
you for
here.
doing it.
Yeah,
and I think that's a big thing, is having a talent strategy is so critical.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you more saleable as opposed to unsaleable. And that's one of the challenges I see with traditional outsourcing, where you send a job and get a job, is that you don't actually have a team. You've got a client list that you're ultimately selling. So I think that we'll cover that off. But I think I just want to, I know this is spoken about a lot, the talent shortage, but if you're thinking it's going to get better in the next 12 months, the reality is it's probably a 3 to 5 year problem. It's only going to get worse. I mean, unemployment in the accounting space is less than 1.8%. I think nationally in America, it's around 3.6. So it's half of what the national average has been and will continue to be. So it's around, what are your options? And that's really what we want to cover off today. What are the different options that you do have? There's 3 different ones in our eyes, and I'm going to be covering these off today. There's offshoring, there's outsourcing, and then there's freelancing. So what is the difference between the 3 of these? And that's really what I'm going to cover off. So traditionally, people know about outsourcing. It's where you engage an outsourcing company and you send a job over. So if you have tax return work that you need to do, you send the tax return to the outsourcing company. Traditionally, most of these have been in India. You'll send a return, they'll complete it in their system and their process, and then they'll send it back to you to review and then ultimately lodge and give to your client. So traditional outsourcing has been around for over 20 years, where you send a job, get a job, and it's very much job related. So it could be an individual tax return, it could be a business tax return. It could be that you need a set of accounts reconciled. It could mean that you need to transition from one system to another, but it's very job based. So offshoring has really become more relevant, and this is the model that we run. And this is our 10th year. So it's been around now for well over 10 years. We were one of the first providers to come into the market with this offering, where it's full-time dedicated support staff. So what that basically means is, for, outsourcing or offshoring to a degree has been around for, well over 50 years. But it was never really available to small businesses, small and medium businesses. It was always for the large businesses. But offshoring became obviously more relevant, particularly in the accounting space when cloud technology came involved, because it was a lot easier to be able to get people to work remotely into a cloud system than it was to the traditional servers and paper-based accounting that we used to have. So offshoring, the easy way to look at offshoring is it's full-time dedicated employees that are working in a typically a country like the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam. It's a low-cost environment, but they are full-time dedicated team members that work in your systems and on your process, and they work solely for you. Outsourcing is send a job, get a job. Freelancing is freelancing/contracting, where you can go onto sites like Upwork. I think it did change names, but it used to be called Upwork, where you could say, look, I need this job done, or I need someone for a month. In the accounting space, there's companies like Paro, P-A-R-O. I always say the name wrong, Beach Valley, Taxfile. There's different companies like that, which are really freelancers. You basically have them for a short amount of time on a contract. I know a company called Accounting Fly. Jeff, who owns that, they do contract and labor hire, if you want to really look at that, which is really short-term engagement. So offshoring is full-time dedicated employees, typically in a developing country. Outsourcing is send a job, get a job. Most of that is done through developing countries. There are some onshore providers like Taxfile and different options like that. And then freelancing is really that contract, short-term engagement of specific projects or work that you need done. So when we really look at how do you build a strategy for your firm and what should your talent strategy be? So I'm going to ask you to jump into the chat. I'm going to make this interactive. Jump into the chat and put a number 1 if your firm or business has a talent strategy, and put a number 2 if you don't. So what do I mean by talent strategy? Is you've mapped out what are the team members that you need over the next 12, 24, 36 months. So number 1 or number 2?
Yeah, so there's only a couple people that have said 1 so far. Most
Not
people,
many.
most
I do
people
love
are
the
2s.
1.5s, Alison. When
Oh,
accounts are
somebody said
closing.
1.5. Who said 1.5? That's cheeky. Oh, they sort of do. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting thing because thinking about staffing as a strategy is something that I think busy firm leaders, obviously should do, right?
Yep.
And probably haven't. It's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it, though, right?
Yeah.
You're
We
like,
typically
oh,
set our
I
financial
better have a
targets.
strategy.
Yeah, we set our numbers, we set our financial numbers every year, but we don't actually work out what capacity, which is, i.e.,
Yeah,
the people we need to be able to deliver those results.
yeah, exactly. And I think there's also this, idea of once we get people, how do we keep them? And, how do we, yeah, cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Mostly 2s. So,
Yep.
and don't feel bad because that's why you're here.
Exactly. Yep. So what do we mean when we're saying, how do you build a strategy? And when we look at strategies, I really look at it in 3 key areas. Is how do you have your local talent? How do you arbitrage that with global talent? And then how do you also have freelance/contract talent that you can scale up or down as you need it? And during tax season is a great time for that freelance contract that you can scale up, because and this is something that I've heard so many accounting firms have been saying in the last 12 months is when we're not taking on new clients. Why would you not take on new clients? And the reason is we don't have the capacity. But I look at it and go, if we're trying to grow a business, the last thing we should be saying is no to new clients. We should be saying no to the wrong type of client, but we should never be saying no to an ideal client. We should get our talent strategy in play so that we can scale up or scale down as we're needed, as opposed to what most people do is when they put an ad up, they struggle to get anyone. So my ideal talent strategy is you have local talent, you're always going to need it. It'll be roughly 60% of your workforce. You're going to have global talent that will be roughly 30% of your workforce. And then you're going to have freelance/contract talent that you'll be able to scale up or down as needed throughout the different periods throughout the year. So when you're building a talent strategy, we really look at it in all these 3 aspects, not just what should your local team or what should your global team be. And when you're looking and building that strategy for your local one, it's how are you going to attract it? How are you going to retain it? So how do you develop your team? Your global talent is how are we going to, there's outsourcing options, there's offshoring options. What's our global strategy? And then the freelance contract. Where freelance contract comes in is you can use local for that, but that's where you can also use some of those outsourcing providers where you can send a job and get a job. You can do that to top up your activity depending on how your I suppose talent strategy or capacity is. When we talk about outsourcing or building a global team, what we really talk about is for the local talent is what do you need to do in-house? So what are the high value, high touch things that you need to do, that you need your local team to do with your clients? And for every firm, that's different. For my firm, when I had my accounting and financial planning firm, a large amount of that was our Philippines team and our global team were communicating with our clients. But we wanted all of the account management. We wanted the advice delivered locally. So really, when you're building this strategy, we want to see what's the high value work that you really add to your clients. And that, in my mind, is the work you do locally. What is the volume related work that is routine, mundane, or mundane, I don't like the word, but it's routine and process that you can delegate and have in your global team, in your offshore team. So when you're really working through I suppose, what work to do where, it's about what's high value, do it locally. What's process orientated, do it in the global team. And I think that is a big part. It's no longer around someone picks up a tax return and does it from the start to finish, because that's not all high value work. And a lot of the time we see, senior accountants working on work that is really low level work. It's junior accountant work, but because they're taking the job from the start to the finish, because that's how the firm traditionally does their process, we need to really relook at that process and go, instead of it being you do the job from start to finish, we want the right people doing the right work at the right time and ultimately the right cost. And there's great technology out there. There's great systems that enable you to build that workflow so that you can break up a process and have the right people doing the different type of work. The great thing that I love to talk about when you're building a global team is that it can accelerate global or local careers. So one of the big things that people think about when they think about building an outsourcing team is that it's actually going to take away from our local team. It's going to take away graduates. It's going to take away the skill sets. But one of the things you need to be prepared for is when you get the right work being done by the right people at the right time and ultimately the right cost, you're going to need to accelerate and invest in your local team to develop and grow them quicker. So this is going to mean that instead of the traditional path of 7 to 9 to 10 years to get to a manager level, I always say, how do you do it in half? And then how do you half it again? So for me, it's about speed to competency. How do we get someone competent quicker? If they're not having to do the routine and mundane work because you've got a team that can do that, they can start coming into meetings. They can start working on higher value work and adding more value to the firm locally. But one thing that having a global team does, and I can say this from 95% of our clients, their local team members' career is fast-tracked because of it. And yes, it's because they're not having to do some of that process-oriented work that they traditionally would have to do.
Nick, I can't applaud this fast enough. Like I literally, if there was like buttons, I'd be hitting them like. One of the things just to talk about attracting and retaining top talent is that younger talent does not want to come in and be bogged down in long career cycles. That's the first thing. They want quick acceleration, and they want really incredibly juicy work that really is, really compelling and meaningful and difficult, right? They want the hard stuff. They want the complicated stuff. So doing this is actually pointing this out here is really, really, really valid, because you will end up with a group of people that are highly motivated and are able to work on the fulfilling, joyous stuff that they want to work on. So it's a win-win. I'm so glad that you mentioned this.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the big point around this is that people want to do meaningful work. And what is meaningful work? Well, it's different for everyone, but it's not doing data entry. It's not doing basic work. It's not collecting information from clients. There's technology, but yet so many firms still have people doing that. People want work-life balance. They don't just want, and I struggle with this because I love work and I work enormous hours, I work weekends, but I do it because I love it. But not everyone's like me. And that's one thing I've had to accept, which I struggle with, to be honest, over the years, is that, not everyone loves or has this one love like you do, Nick. It's, people do want work-life balance. And I think that you've got to enable that. And if you can enable that and you can accelerate local careers, you're not going to have the challenges in attracting client or team members. But I look at the job ads that are posted on Indeed and other platforms, and they bore me when I read them. And they are not the type of business that I'd want to work for. And I look at that and go, you know, if you were to run an ad saying we're going to accelerate your career, you're going to work on meaningful, you're going to do meaningful work every day that has an impact on the clients. You know, our business has a purpose to help small businesses. You're going to attract great talent.
Well, the other thing you can say to them is you will lead a global team.
Yep.
Like, hello.
It's
That's
leadership skills.
that is super compelling to a millennial and a Gen Z. Super compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this all builds into that talent strategy. And I always love to highlight, because a lot of people think, oh, you know, we're taking away. And this next point that I'm going to talk about is around graduates. We still need graduates. They're just not going to be in a 5-year graduate program where they have to go and make coffee and filing and doing all the stuff that I know that I had to do when I first started out. It's about how can we accelerate their careers. They need to be technically competent, both on a theory and a practical part. But as soon as they can tick those boxes, how do we progress them and get them to do more meaningful work, more valuable work for the firm? So graduates still need to be part of the local strategy, but they're just going to be accelerated. A big thing with when you're starting to really put in place a talent strategy is you need to get your team buy-in. And that's not just about having a global team. It's about using freelancers, contractors. It's about where they fit within the strategy, where you see their career plan over the next 9 years, what you're going to do to help and enable and assist them. Because a lot of people, when they start outsourcing, people just naturally think, oh, I'm going to lose my job, or they're doing it because they want to make more money. When normally that is, for 99% of the clients that we take on, that's not the reason. Yes, the cost arbitrage, you can get 3 team members globally for the same cost of one, definitely helps. It definitely helps your bottom line. But that's not the reason you do it. You're doing it to build capacity and to accelerate careers locally, but ultimately to be able to serve your client in a more meaningful and cost-effective way. But you need to get team buy-in. So whenever you're rolling out a strategy, the number one reason we see a lot of firms struggle initially is they don't roll out why they're doing this strategy. And people will just assume. So get your team buy-in. Have them as the biggest advocates for it. They will, even if you don't do that, and then they start the journey. Once they get it, they'll get it. And then they will be your biggest advocates, but it's a lot easier to get the team buy-in right from the start. So it's take the team on the journey, help them be part of this whole building of your talent strategy. If they're on the journey, they're going to be the ones that are driving and enabling it, as opposed to the ones that are going to be stopping it from being successful. And we still have this story from clients. I had one that was using another provider that's moving to us during this conference that I've been at. And he was saying, look, our managers just don't give the work to the global team because they just don't have the trust yet, and they just don't have an understanding of their capability. And I said, well, that's all part of the onboarding. And I'll talk about a few different ways that we tackle that throughout today's event anyway. And that's really what I'm going to talk about now is what are the best practices for building a global team? So how do you actually make sure that when you do this, that it's a success? Because one of the biggest challenges that we do see when people go down this path is that having a remote team, and some of you, or a lot of you would have experienced this through the pandemic, it exposes your lack of process. It exposes the lack of communication or systems that you have for communication. And in a lot of cases, it exposes people's capability of training people. And these are some of the things that do get exposed during this process. Now, is that a bad thing? In my eyes, it's not, because once you identify it, you can fix it. And that is the most important part of it, is being able to do that. So what are some of the best practices for building a global team? Now, we've built a course called Offshore Best Practice. All of our clients, when they become a client, go through this program. It's an 8-module course. We have a training account or training business, a registered training organization. So it's a certified course through there. And we also provide this in a 1-day digital program for our clients. And it goes through what I call the good, bad, and ugly. We've got over 1,000 firms. I myself had a global team with my firm, and we've been doing this for over 10 years now. So we've seen the firms that do it really, really well. We see the common mistakes that firms make when they do it, and everything in between. And our clients range from sole practitioners. Our largest clients are $1.5 billion accounting firm, one of the top 10 in America. And we've seen everything in between it. So there's not many things that we haven't seen firms do right or wrong during this process. And that's largely why we built this course, is that ultimately we want our firms to succeed quicker. We don't want them have to go through the mistakes that, I know that I made when I first started out, and that we saw our pioneer clients, our early adopter clients, go through the same sort of process. So we've ultimately built a course to be able to do that. And it's things like understanding the different, when you're outsourcing and offshoring to another country, a developing country, it's understanding the differences between them, because typically they are developing countries. They typically are in Asia. So it's a very different culture to we have over here in the West. So it's things like in the Philippines, when someone says yes to you, it doesn't mean they understand. You could ask them, do you understand? They'll say yes, but their culture is one of pleasing. So they don't want to disappoint you by telling you no. Once they've built that trust with you, and I've had my executive assistant for 10 years, she will rightfully tell me what I'm doing right or wrong. But that took some time, and it took a lot of trust and building that trust. So in the early days, we teach our clients around that validation of, if you ask them, how do you understand what I'm talking about? Don't just ask them that. When they say yes, go, great, can you now relay it back to me? Or can you show me, I just went through the process of how to do a tax return. Now you show me how you do it. And you go through that as a training process. So there's little things like that. There's the hierarchy of needs, the cultural differences between countries. Philippines, one of the great things about the Philippines is it was a state of America for 48 years. The other region that we're in is South Africa. So it's very similar. It's a APEC country, so it's very Commonwealth country. It's very similar to Australia and the UK in some ways, and there are similarities with the West on that side of it, or particularly in the US. So the course really goes through all of these different areas that you need to focus on. How do you manage your workflow? When you're training a team, the easiest way to do it is, when you're training them, is to record it. Like today's event's being recorded. You can use Zoom, you can use Microsoft Teams. I mean, we're a Microsoft business personally. So anytime we're on Teams and we're doing training with one of our team members, we simply record it. And Microsoft has a product which is part of the suite that you pay for. It used to be called Stream, or it wasn't Stream, but I forget what the name of it is, but all of our videos go into that system. So it's already part of what you're paying with your Microsoft licensing for Outlook and Excel and Word. So you just simply record it, and then you build a video library. So over time, and you'll quickly build a range of training videos that when you have new team members now coming on, that forms part of their onboarding plan. So there's a range of things that you need to do to get prepared to build a global team. And I think that that is really one of the key ones. The biggest thing that we tell people is it's one team. And why we say that, it's not an outsourced team where you're sending work to them and you're getting it back. If you're building an offshore team, you're building an extension, or I say another office to your business. It now happens to be the Philippines office or the South African office. So you need to treat it as one team. If you do things locally, you then look at how do we do them globally. So if you celebrate Independence Day, for example, in America, how do you do that in the Philippines? How does the Philippines and South Africa team do that and celebrate at the same time? If tax season's just finished, congratulations on getting through another one. So I'm sure you would have celebrated at the end of that, or I hope you celebrated a successful, even though it's hard, it would have been successful. You learn from your mistakes and you apply to make sure that they don't happen again. But how did you celebrate with your local team? And if you haven't yet, go and have a celebration with them. But then how do you do that with your global team? So you need to be a lot more prescriptive when you do have global teams. And particularly a lot of you would also have remote teams. But ultimately, it's one team. It's not your offshore team or your global team. It's one team. It's just another office. You really need to get your systems and processes in place. Now, for many people that become clients of ours, they build these as they go. And the reason they do that is it would take years and years to build your systems and process in a way that you would be perfect and happy with. And the reality is we just never get them done. So how a lot of our clients actually do this is while they're training up a global team, they record those I suppose, training sessions. They build that as a training library. But then what they start to do is they get their global team to start to document the process. So there's different ways that you can do that. There's plenty of books on how to build process that you can read, and ways that you can build standing operating procedures. But the reality is your global team can assist you to do that while you're growing the team. But the better your systems are, the better use of technology that you have, the easier it is to run a global and a remote team. And I think that this is the great, I take good out of all bad. The great thing about the pandemic is it really taught everyone how to run remote teams, how to work not just in an office, but outside of an office. Now, I love working in the office. We are 90% in office as a business globally across all countries. We believe in human connection. We believe in all the benefits and value of that. But it doesn't mean you can't have flexibility. And I think that's the thing you just need to build into it. But I could go down a whole rabbit hole with that whole conversation, but getting your systems and process in place, no matter whether you're building a global team or not. I always say to people, if you've got a high performing team, if you want a high performing business, you need to have really good systems and process in place, and you need to utilize technology the most efficient and effective way to help your team succeed. I see a lot of businesses give their team members really bad tools, or they're doing things, and yes, you can do it more cost effectively in the Philippines, for example, but why would you do data entry in the Philippines when there's technology that could do that? Why would you follow up clients for information when there's portals and systems? And Alison, you can talk all day about that. Why would you do that to your team when there's technology that can do that? Get them doing the meaningful and valuable work. Even though you can cost effectively do it the other way, you need to give your teams the right tools to succeed. And I relate this back to sport. All of the best sporting teams that do well year on year have great facilities. They give their team members the right tools to succeed. But in a lot of cases, as accounting and bookkeeping owners, we don't spend the time to do that because we're always busy. But how do we focus to give our team the right tools to succeed?
Yeah, Nick, just really quickly, one of the reasons why I love working with you is, first of all, I learn so much always, every webinar. But the second thing is we have a great overlap between our products. And so there
100%.
are a lot of TOA global firms that use Liscio to facilitate that communication and have that one place for the teams to understand what was said to the clients, what clients said back, what documents were sent, et cetera, no matter who was saying it. And so it's an interesting, thing when you think about your systems and your processes. I always say, figure out where your biggest bottleneck is, right? And start with those. Because if you've got a bottleneck internally now, and then you add a global team, that's just going to exacerbate it, right? And one of the things that people struggle with, of course, is client communications and just wrangling all of that. So that can really help. I do have a question that's curious for me though. Do you give does everyone get their teams, like the email addresses that people use? That's the address of the firm, right?
Yes.
Okay. So they're just firm employees, but they're located in these other countries. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I'm going to talk about setting up your IT actually next. But one of the things is that they work within the environment of the firm. So we provide the facilities and the infrastructure for them to work, but ultimately they're working within the firm's infrastructure and within their technology. So firm's email, firm's technology, we don't have access to any of that. Yeah. And that's, I suppose, the difference between offshoring and outsourcing. When you're outsourcing, you're sending a tax return, they do it in their system.
Someone else's system. Yeah.
And then they send it back to you. So there is that data part of it. But again, those businesses have, they're all ISO and SOC compliant. They've got their security locked down. But there is more risk when you're transferring your data to a third party in that way. To offshoring is really they're working in our environment, but they're within your systems.
Right. Great. Good. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'll move on to the technology part. And this is one of the most critical parts, is setting up your IT and security. So when you're having a global team, you want to make sure that your technology is secure. Now, this is whether you're building a global team or not, this is something that you should be doing, One of the products that we use, and I've been good friends with Jamie that owns Practice Protect, which is a cybersecurity and password protection platform. When I first started, Jamie was in my entrepreneurs organization group that I met with every month, and he ran a normal IT business. And I kept saying to him, look, we're building a global team. And one of the biggest challenges we have is people don't want their teams to understand all of the passwords. So they ended up building a product where you put all of your passwords into this one system, and your team members only know the password to get into that system. So if they want to access QuickBooks or Intuit, or they want to access Xero, or they want to access any of the systems, they go in and they click the button, and it automatically authenticates it, and they go into it. So they can lock that down, for example, into our offices. So when you have a team in the Philippines, they can only access Practice Protect in our IP address that's in our office during the work hours that they're going to be there. So you can location lock it down. So with your local team, for example, you can lock it down to just their home if they're working remote, and they can only access it during certain hours. But one of the things that we always say to our clients when we take them through this process is you need to make sure that your systems are set up and secure, so that when you have your global teams, they're working within it like a normal remote employee would be. You've just got that extra added layer of obviously them being within another country. A big part that we always see where people, I suppose, are exposed, or the exposure comes in, is that normally you have great technicians, but most people don't train their intermediates and seniors on leadership. Now, I'll ask that question in the chat. If you can just jump in the chat, how many of you have trained and train your team every year? Put a number 1 if you do leadership training with all of your leaders and emerging leaders on a regular basis. Put a number 1 if you do, and a number 2 if you don't.
Yeah, so we've got actually some nice ones and many twos coming in.
You know, that is good, because typically people don't, and particularly in Australia, but I do see that America is a little bit more advanced with leadership training, which is great, because it's very much needed.
I always think that it's a firm leader's responsibility to create a leadership factory. Right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think
Great question.
That's part of the success. So I think that, so with training your local team, you know, when you have a remote team, when you want to be able to train and get people up to speed quickly, being great leaders is a must. So you need to invest in training. And if you've got emerging leaders, and this is a thing with a global team, and Alison mentioned this earlier, you're going to have younger team members managing remote teams, because it is some of that routine and mundane work that they can train them on. So you need to give them the leadership skills, the capability to be able to lead and manage a team for the stage that they are in their career. So training your local team on leadership, for me, is a massive critical part to getting a global team working. Mapping out the onboarding, again, it's such an important part. We assist, we do the first week we do of training, or we have accelerated programs where we can pre-train tax team members, for example, for 7 weeks for you. But you need to map out the onboarding. How are you going to onboard these people during their first, not only week or month, but what's the first 6 months of onboarding look like? If you really want team members, whether it be local or global, to be successful, onboarding is not a week. Onboarding is 6 to 12 months. How do we get them successful? And how do we accelerate their success? You need to understand the culture of your team members, where they work. And that's even locally. We have within our American office, we have many different cultures. Within our Australian office, we have many different cultures. And it's up to us as leaders to understand the different cultures and the different ways that people communicate and ultimately work. And building a global team, like I mentioned about our offshore best practice course, you really need to understand the country where that team member is based, so that you can have a full understanding of that side of it.
I have a little funny story, Nick, of when I was in the UK. Now my background, I was born in the UK, and all my relatives are British. Okay. So when Intuit placed me there seconded me for 2 years, in 2011, I thought, oh, I got this. I got this. Well, it turned out I didn't. When a Brit says to you, brilliant, let's do it, they're actually not really saying they're going to do it. What they're saying is, I don't hate the idea. I want to be polite to you. And I'm agreeing to talk about this with you 4 more times, and then we'll involve my supervisor. It took me 3 months to learn that. So the first 3 months, I was there thinking I had agreements with people. No, I didn't have any agreements at all. And then I was feeling like I was a crazy person. So understanding that I cannot impress upon you from my personal experience as a leader, I cannot impress upon you this is probably like, this is one of the money slides of your presentation. You really do have to understand how they work and the best way and whether you have agreement or not, I think, right?
100%.
Yeah.
It's, we've got many stories around where, I had one where the client just wanted them to update the details within the Intuit system. And, they thought it was pretty easy to upload the logo and do that. And team member said yes. And, it took them they didn't check in for 2 days with the team member. It should have taken them an hour. And 2 days later, they went back and said, oh, where are you at? Like, you haven't done it. I don't understand how to do it. So I've never had to do it before. So it's just that it's those subtle little things about how do we understand the cultures, because you can just fast track everything. If you understand it, you can just fast track it.
Yeah, and you have to understand also like the power of your like what you're actually saying to the person. I had an employee many years ago from Kenya, and I said to him, do not pay this bill until you have all of the supporting documents. But what I really meant was just let me know if you're missing anything, right? But I didn't say let me know if you're missing. So 3 months went by and these bills came in. It was the credit card bill for the company. And these 3 months went by and there was no payment at all because he was missing something. He just put it in his drawer. It was bad instructions on my part, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure we all have examples of that, but it's anyways. Yeah.
It's a big one. So I'm going to quickly skip through because I know we're running out of time here. The big one that I always talk about is you need to travel to see your team. This is just another office now. So if you're building a global team, no matter what country it's in, you need to go and see them or you need to bring them to you. It's like having someone working for you if you're in the West Coast and someone's working for you on the East Coast and you never getting together throughout the year. That human connection is so important, and that face-to-face contact and training just accelerates things. So if you're building a global team, and typically when we're looking at building a global team, if you've got 20 people onshore, then typically you could have up to 20 to 40 people offshore. So a 1-to-1 ratio if you're doing it really well, a 2-to-1 ratio if you're absolutely nailing it. So if you have a team of 20 locally and a team of 20 globally, then you need to go and see that team. You can't just have them, send them the work and have a digital relationship. That human connection is so critical. Now I'm going to quickly cover a few of the myths around outsourcing, because I know that there's definitely ones that come up. The first one that we typically cover off is the quality of work's not great. Now, we always say that the quality of work depends on how great your system is and how good your process is. So your systems and process, but ultimately it's how good you train them. So you've got to remember when you're going into a country like the Philippines or South Africa or India or whatever country it is, they're not qualified in American tax. They typically have not worked in that environment before. They're an accountant that has local experience of 3 to 10 years, but they don't have the American part. So how do you arbitrage that? Well, again, we help with that. We've got a registered training organization. It's a private college going through certification in America. We're certified in the Philippines and Australia. We're NASBAR accredited in the US. But how do you train them to help them be effective? And the first one is that the quality of work is not there. Normally it comes down to system and process or lack of training. It's not normally because they're not competent. Now, a lot of our clients say to us, we can't believe how great these team members are. They outperform our local teams. They are highly skilled and highly educated and great accountants. But without the right training and without the right tools to succeed, they won't succeed. So quality is not normally an issue. It's normally a firm issue as opposed to an outsourcing issue. Now, the difference is when you send a tax return to a provider and you get the tax return back, the quality of work there can be variable because it depends on the person that's doing the work, what's their experience, what's the growth of that outsourcing provider. If they're growing really fast, they're going to have the same problems that you have. They're going to have to train people, get them growing. So that's the difference between the outsourcing model where you send a job and get a job. You can get quality variations depending on how successful that outsourcing provider is. When it's an offshore model where you have a full-time dedicated person that you're ultimately co-responsible for training them, then quality is not normally an issue unless they have the wrong tools or they don't get the training. So that is normally one of them. The IT risk, cybersecurity is normally the second one. But again, with the offshoring model, when you have your team member working remotely in your infrastructure, then it's how good is your infrastructure set up locally. And that's a key part of it. Again, when our clients go through this process, we put them through an IT offshore ready assessment with Practice Protect so that you can see where any of the challenges that you may have are, and you can obviously help get them fixed. So they're really the two big ones, is around quality of work and it's around data security and privacy.
Nick, I know we've got a poll we want to pop in really quickly, but while we do you mind taking a question from?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, so Diane put the question in the chat, so let me just grab that. We'll go ahead and do the poll here real quick. And then Diane says, what if you needed to learn specialty bookkeeping, for example, job costing for construction? And can you get people trained in specific software programs, or do they only work with something like QBO or Xero or what have you, generic?
Yeah, so we train in about 80 different softwares. We've got those in our curriculum. But if there's one that we don't have, our training team can definitely work with that software company that you use to either use their training or to help build some. So look, they can do very specific niche work. Again, it's the process and training that they just need to be able to do that. So
Diane, I would say that's a yes to both. You know, it's the software you want them to work on, and then the other thing is that if there is niche or niche, however you say it, training, then that's part of your onboarding. That's great. We'll give the poll just another 30 seconds. We've got a few people that haven't chimed in, but thank you for those who are chiming in. And then very quickly, we're going to share, Davita's going to share a link to a webinar that I think many of you might be interested in. It's in next week, I think, or May 17th, whenever that is, 2 weeks from now, solving the capacity crisis in your firm. And we will be mentioning some of the things that Nick has mentioned and also offering a little bit more on TOA Global because we have one of your biggest clients coming on. So that'll be interesting.
yes.
Top 100 firm. So I think we're almost out of time. So what would you like? You got a couple minutes left, Nick. What would you like to cover off at the very end here?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, there's a lot being covered today. And I always say to people, thank you for investing your time. You know, you've invested an hour of your time and your time is valuable. And we know that time is an infinite resource that we all have only a limited amount of. Please take something away and implement it. You know, take 5 minutes. You've invested an hour with us. Take 5 to 10 minutes to just write down what's 1 or 2 things that you're actually going to implement. Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I think that's always my advice is, you know, I really value the time that you've given us today, but please go and implement at least one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, the main takeaways are, you know, focus on your leadership of growing your US staff, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then your processes and your processes and thinking about your staffing, having a strategic plan. I just think that's really, really, yeah. And then I'm going to just put in a quick plug for having great systems to support it as well. So I think that's just a really good example because when you add more staff, if you ask them to work with tons of different disparate systems, you've got more places where things can break down. Yeah.
It just amplifies that challenge. And I think the people strategy is the key. If you get the people strategy, what's the mix of talent? Where's the talent? How do you attract it, retain it? It's a huge thing. So appreciate, Alison, the opportunity as well.
Yeah, and Nick, I so appreciate you and your team. You're always on top of it, and you are you know, you're just such a joy, and I really, really appreciate you sharing all of this information. And folks, we will be sending out the recording. And one of you had mentioned you were recording the chat, like the getting the transcript. If that person wants to send it to me to my email, we'll happily include it. We don't normally do the transcript, but that could be fun for everybody. All right, well, it's a wrap. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Nick, safe travels home.
Thank you. Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
bye now.
Appreciate your time.